We do have a ton to get through in this episode.
Common sense is finally prevailing.
There was controversy this month, Dave.
I'm not particularly excited by that.
Secrets and things on set.
I haven't told them anything.
I think this is just good times all round.
Every Doctor Who is liked by somebody, and that's a really good thing.
Davo, my doctor.
I know we disagree on this one.
First world problems, Dave.
I get why fans are asking those questions.
Oh gosh, that's actually quite a lot to talk about.
It doesn't compute.
It's the elephant in the room.
That's okay.
Fandom versus the BBC.
The cardinal sin.
Moving along.
Lunch.
G'day, I'm Rob.
And I'm Dave.
And you're listening to the Doctor Who show for the month of February. And Dave, I know we came back a couple of weeks ago in a List Makers episode, but that was only 20 minutes worth to be sitting here looking at a run sheet with news, short topics, a main topic, listener feedback, and it's the end of February when I was last here doing this before Christmas. It feels so long ago, Dave. It feels like I've been away forever from the big show, but anyway, how are you?
I'm good. I was also thinking as I was getting ready, it has been a while since we've sat down and done one of these. But anyway, it's good. We have a great topic tonight. We have a lot of things to cover. I'm excited for this one, Rob.
Yeah, me too. And of course, before we get into it, as we always do if we get a iTunes review, I am going to read something from one of our listeners, Dave.
Oh, fantastic.
Yes, this is from JC17_Ace on January 21st, a great contextual Doctor Who podcast, 5 stars. And it runs, Rob and Dave put together a great show here. Much like a DVD box set, you come for the main show and stick around for the bonus extras. There's some really good stuff to enjoy from two guys steeped in the classic era of Doctor Who, and it's not always just about the episodes. There are discussions on writers, books, audios, and even old stage plays. Check out their 60th anniversary episode on their respective fan experiences, which is just a delight.
Thank you very much for that review. A DVD box set. I like the way he puts that. That's a nice, cool little parable.
Yeah, with the extras.
Yes, that's cool.
Now, before we get into the news, Dave, I believe you want to give a wee shout out to an event you'll be at in a few weeks' time.
Yes, coming up in March is the next Sirens of Audio event here in Australia. And for those of you who aren't in Australia, you'll have to forgive us for continually plugging these. But hey, we always get to listen to all of your panopticons and galleys and all the other ones and the many, many, many day events that you have in the UK. So bear with us. Those wonderful chaps over at the Sirens of Audio are bringing the delightful Matthew Waterhouse out to Australia. He will be in Melbourne on the 23rd of March. I've got my ticket booked for that. He'll be in Adelaide on the 29th of March and Sydney on the 30th of March. I do encourage you, if you're in any of those cities, to get along. Matthew Waterhouse is a delightful guest. He's a very interesting, intelligent chap. He's very aware of the foibles of his youth and very happy to discuss them. He's very aware of the foibles and the good aspects of his fellow cast members and production team and happy to discuss them in a very sort of open, light and honest way, which I think makes for the best sort of guest. So yes, check out the Sirens of Audio website if you're interested in that.
Yeah, I think Waterhouse, in the kind of environment the Sirens guys do, will go off. Yeah,
he will absolutely just take a nice intimate room of 80, 100, 120 or so and just be very, very honest with them in not an aggressive way, not a nasty way. Just
no.
Hey, yeah, look, it was a very weird part of my childhood. Because let's face it, it was his childhood.
Yeah, is he in his 60s now?
Oh, he must be.
Yeah, gosh.
Yeah, that's a bit freaky. So, yeah, a man in his 60s looking back at his youth with honesty is always quite fun.
Yeah. Alrighty then, let's move into some news. I'm going to kick us off with some news that broke this week when we were putting together our show notes, so it's quite recent, and that's the Big Finish have some more Eccleston stories up their sleeve for release, and this time around they're actually pairing him up with Billie Piper as Rose. And Dave, frankly, this is what they should have done all along.
Yes, was the lack of doing it before that he didn't want to, or she didn't want to, or they didn't want to, or it just stars didn't align?
Yeah, presumably just stars didn't align, but you'd think, well, why not just wait, because I tried so very, very hard to get into the Eccleston stuff when he first came to Big Finish, but it just didn't feel right. with Eccleston on TV, we get the sense he's newly regenerated. I mean, people try and downplay that now, but the whole thing with him looking at his ears and being surprised and all that shtick was to suggest a new Doctor as befitted a new show.
Yes.
And what's more, that Doctor still had his PTSD, still had his survivor's guilt, all of that stuff. At first, he didn't even want to play nice with Rose, and then they went on their journey and she helped heal him. Yada, yada, yada. So when the Big Finish story started coming out and it was like, oh yeah, Eccleston was getting around the universe having jolly adventures before Rose and he was picking up all sorts of people to hang out with and had all these adventures, it just felt really off. And I gave up after the second set. I just couldn't get motivated for it. But this, I think this has potential, this new set. It's Eccleston and Piper. The stories are only an hour long, and there are 12 of them. So it's going to be like a series that we never got, or maybe more correctly, an expansion of the series we did get. I'm cautiously optimistic, Dave. This is, after all, what I wanted them to do all along. How about you?
I'm pleased that it's happening. I do remember when I saw Christopher Eccleston speak at a con a couple of years ago, he said that Rose was the only companion he would allow his Doctor to be paired up with. He wasn't interested in Big Finish making up other companions or pulling in other companions of other eras. He said, no, that's my Doctor. That's my era. It's either just me walking alone or it's me with Rose. So I think that's a very appropriate decision. Does this mean you'll be going out and buying them straight away, Rob?
I may do. Yeah.
Fair enough. I will be waiting for the reviews, as I did with the last Eccleston sets, and frankly, the reviews were, yeah, look, they're fine, but you could probably miss them, so I did. But yeah, look, I'm curious, and if people like yourself say, you know what, this is the best thing Eccleston's done since Series 1, I'll say, yeah, okay, maybe I'll give some of them a go.
Yeah, okay. Challenge accepted.
That brings us on to our monthly news segment on unsubstantiated rumours and Shooty Watch and all the rest of it.
It's becoming monthly, yes.
It is. So look, there's a few things that have been swirling around in the last month. Certainly, we are aware that Disney still has not decided if it will exercise its option to produce a third season, or co-fund, I should say, a third season of New Doctor Who. And as I've been saying for some time, I don't think they'll make that decision until they've seen Season 2 roll out and had a chance to let the numbers from that percolate. So I think that's still very much in the waiting. But rumours continue to swirl. They were swirled even more when it was announced that Russell T Davies is going to make a new Channel 4 drama called Tiptoe, which is a suburban thriller about a feud between two neighbours living in Manchester and follows issues facing the LGBT community. So Russell T Davies is going back to the Queer as Folk Cucumber well for another go. Yeah. So, look, fair enough. But, you know, that did mean that a few people were asking questions about just how big is Bad Wolf Productions if they're making that. Does that mean that they are not able to make Doctor Who? And look, I don't have an answer to that. I've spoken to a couple of people in the industry who say, look, it makes it harder, it may delay it, but it doesn't make it impossible. So that's sort of thrown a few people up to saying, well, they're not making Doctor Who because they've gone on to make some other stuff and RTD's now show running something else. So look, that's in the mix.
Well, I mean, prior to that, Dave, we got an unsubstantiated rumour sent to us saying, look, when Shooty finishes The Importance of Being Earnest, he's going to quickly film a bit of Doctor Who stuff, then they're going to pull down the sets. And lo and behold, about, a week or two after that, we heard that Bad Wolf were pulling down the set and had a message out on social media saying that their soundstage was, available for hire, which pretty much confirmed it.
Yes, and again, other unsubstantiated rumours that Ncuti Gatwa has filmed a regeneration scene. People are very quick to stress when they're sharing those rumours, not necessarily one that's going to go to air at the end of Season 2, but one that could go to air at the end of Season 2, saying that things are still very much up in the air. Now, that was further compounded when literally 4 minutes after I'd hit print on my show notes to print them out the other day, we had an article going around saying that Doctor Who had been axed and Ncuti Gatwa was on his way out. That was in one of the tabloids in the UK. Other tabloids have now had variations of that rumour. Some have gone on to say that Ncuti Gatwa wants to move full-time to LA and pursue an acting career. Another article said that Ncuti Gatwa is very aware that the new season did not go down as well as people would have liked. He doesn't want it to be something that's anchoring him. Now, the BBC have come out. Yes. And they have forcefully denied that Doctor Who is being axed and have said that Disney have bought 26 episodes and they're going to get 26 episodes. the BBC has not come out and forcefully said Ncuti Gatwa has not resigned as the Doctor. Now, again, they may just not want to go chasing rabbits down rabbit holes. All of this means, Rob, I still think we are going to get a third season of Doctor Who one day.
Yes.
I think it's very up in the air whether it's going to be Disney co-funded, somebody else co-funded, or a BBC production, and I think it's going to be at least 2 years off.
Easily.
As for whether Ncuti Gatwa is the Doctor again, I don't know, Rob, but I did find the other day, as I was driving along pondering, I had started making plans for our 16 for 16 episode of the Doctor Who show. So somewhere in my subconscious, I am now planning for them to pick the next Doctor Who. Now, Rob, I know you've got some thoughts. What do you make of this all?
I raised a wry eyebrow, Dave, when the BBC came out and were like, the show hasn't been axed, full stop. Nothing on Ncuti. And of course the show hasn't been axed at this point in time. We've got a second season coming out and so on. It hasn't been axed. What they're saying is perfectly true. But I don't think they're telling the full story there. I think you've got to read between the lines a little. I'm not overly hopeful for the future of the show. I think 2028 before they get a new season up, especially if it's not Bad Wolf and it's not RTD involved. If it all gets pulled back into the BBC and RTDs were like, I've had enough, and Bad Wolf is like, yeah, we gave this a shot, and they bugger off, and it's got to be revitalised with a new production team. I can see it being 2028.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating, the sort of atmosphere around fandom at the moment, Rob, because it feels, as we're having these discussions, as though we're all a little bit nervous we could be on the cusp of another wilderness period. But we're only weeks away from an entire season of Doctor Who being dropped. We're probably only a few weeks after that from an entire spin-off season of Doctor Who being dropped. And yet we're all acting as though we're never going to see any Doctor Who for years to come. And look, there's an outside chance it could never be back. Yet there's another season coming down. And it's just this bizarre, extraordinary situation we are all in with this made but not broadcast season. The fact they don't know how the episode is going to end. Is the Doctor regenerating at the end or not? How many reshoots of the series finale did they have to do to make it work? Is it just a quick 5 minutes at the end as, oh, well, we've solved that big problem. I'm all good to go. Oh, whoops, I've tripped over and now I'm regenerating. or are they going to try and seed extra scenes through the episode to set it up? I don't know. It could all be nonsense. It could all be unsubstantiated rumour. I stress that, listeners, but they say there's no smoke without fire, and my God, is there a lot of smoke out there. We are going to need a new smog act for the amount of smoke that is out there at the moment, so something must be on fire somewhere, surely.
Yeah, and we can say, quite honestly, dear listener, while there is a lot of unsubstantiated rumour on Reddit and you think, oh, someone's just making that up, we do talk to people who are in the industry and who know people and who have told us stuff along these lines. So, don't think it's just garbage, is all I'll say.
Yes, I think that's correct. We are here reporting rumours to you, hopefully in as honest and open-faced a manner as possible. Listeners, you can decide what to believe and what not, or we could all just say Ja Guru Deva Om and let the universe decide what's going to happen and not stress about it.
Nothing's going to change our world.
Nothing's going to change our world.
Moving on to not a fun topic to talk about, the same as when I first spoke about it in our September episode last year, but anyway, here goes. Neil Gaiman. There was an article in the New York magazine last month. There was a cover story, no less, which took the Tortoise Media podcast that I was talking about last September. And sadly, this article found even more people willing to speak in relation to having some pretty bad experiences with Gaiman. And it was interesting. There was a swell of people on social media like, gosh, good on the New York magazine for revealing this. And I was thinking, wow, it was my sense this wasn't getting airtime back when we first spoke about it. And this to me was the proof. All these people who, from the looks of them, were social media savvy, they were pop culture types, and this was the first they were hearing about it. That was surprise number one for me. Surprise number two happened very soon after when Vulture reported that Scarlett Pavlovich, who the original podcast had followed quite extensively, has filed a lawsuit in US federal court against Gaiman on human trafficking charges, and additionally accused him of sexual abuse, assault, rape, coercion. And the complaint also names Amanda Palmer, his estranged wife, and accuses her procuring her for Gaiman and failing to warn her about his history of sexual misconduct. Of course, it would be remiss not to add that Gaiman has denied all allegations of non-consensual sexual activity, which he has been accused of by multiple women, and on it goes. And the wild thing is, Dave, this is a super famous author in his own right, also a Doctor Who writer, and I still don't think this has got the traction of, say, did you hear John Barrowman flash some people a decade ago and they thought it was funny? I don't know what it takes to get this under more people's noses. It's multiple women, it's US federal court, it's very serious, very gross charges, and yet I still think this is somehow flying under some radars out there, and I really don't understand why.
Yeah, look, it's very sad news. I can say, as I've said before, I'm not somebody who really knows a lot about Neil Gaiman. He's a guy who wrote a couple of episodes of Doctor Who and an episode of Babylon 5 in my world. So maybe that, for a lot of people, I mean, that's all and possibly less. So maybe he's not quite the big name that he is for a lot of people that you see him as, Rob. Maybe it's just very sadly that we are kind of saturated with these sorts of stories. I think one of the sad things about being fans of television and telefantasy and Hollywood movies and all the rest of it is over the last 10 to 15 years, we have really come to appreciate just how toxic organisations have been, how horrible they have been in covering up the offences of on-screen talent and the peccadillos of on-screen talent and the problems in the workplaces. No one has got away with this. The BBC, and I know, look, a lot of people in the UK hold the BBC up in very high regard, but the BBC has had a very large number of scandals and toxic stories come out, and Hollywood's had even more, and it doesn't seem to be dying down all that much, which is very, very sad. And yes, I do just wonder if, it's like school shooting tragedies in the US. At some point, it just becomes another one. Yeah. And that's horrible to think about. But are we there with some of these Hollywood television scandals? It's now just, well, that's another one.
Yeah, I'm not a tattoo guy, but I still don't think I would ever get a tattoo of a quote from a TV show or, I don't know, a portrait of someone from a TV show or a movie, because you just don't know in 5, 10, 15 years whether something absolutely horrible is going to come out about them. I mean, think of back in the day, I love Buffy. Imagine if you got a Joss Whedon quote or something on your arm. How would you feel about that today? I mean, and yet that would have been inconceivable back in the day. Oh, Joss isn't going to let us down. People were wearing T-shirts saying, Joss Whedon is my master. It's Star Wars' fault.
Joss Whedon was a leading Hollywood feminist who was acclaimed for the feminism in Buffy and having strong female leads and breaking down cultural taboos. Well, you know what? Neil Gaiman's in that camp as well. So it's just, I'll say no more. It's just mind-boggling and sad.
Yeah.
Speaking of the BBC, another disappointing story that does reflect upon Doctor Who. And Rob, I won't try and paraphrase this. I will read a couple of comments from a Screen Rant article. Doctor Who Season 2, Episode 11, Fear Her, was initially taken down in August 2024 due to Hugh Edwards' cameo as a newsreader following his guilty plea to charges involving indecent images of children. As reported by Radio Times, the BBC episode Fear Her is now back on BBC iPlayer. However, it now features actor Becky Wright replacing expelled newsreader Hugh Edwards in several scenes. Now, look, we don't live in the UK. We don't, I think, know a lot about Hugh Edwards. I am aware that he did take over from David Dimblblblum as the host of the BBC's election night coverage. I'm aware that he was the one who announced the death of Queen Elizabeth II, so he's obviously a fairly significant presence over in the UK. I did sort of follow this a bit when it broke, and again, the BBC did not cover itself in glory with the way that it, I think, covered up is maybe too strong a word, allegedly did not provide as open a investigation as they could have, maybe, is the legalistic and polite way to say it. Look, so I know this is blown up. Obviously, he did have a small cameo in the episode Fear Her. Interestingly, they have decided, as has been, I think, sort of the precedent now that he's with persona non grata, they have taken that episode down. Interesting, though, that they have gone to the lengths of getting Becky Wright, who I must admit I don't know at all, to record some new material and replace it. That's how much they're sort of tidying up after this. I don't really want to go down much more of a path other than to report this one, I think.
Yeah, although I'll make a comment on editing episodes, which is, where do you draw the line with this? Like in the first series of Doctor Who, we have episodes with, Mickey Smith in them, and they're problematic for people, but are they problematic enough that you take the episodes down, or you try and edit Mickey out? I don't think you can edit Mickey out. What about Adam from that same first series? I can't think of the actor's name, but he became problematic, but apparently not problematic enough. It's interesting where a line gets drawn. Obviously, if someone's done something absolutely horrendous, of course, okay, fine. But when you sort of start dropping down in the severity of the charges or whatever it might be, where do you draw the line in terms of re-editing a program? And I don't know. Yeah,
it's a very complicated one, and one that I don't propose to sort of explore much beyond asking that question tonight, Rob. I think the other factor is, as an old commanding officer of mine once said, the higher you fly, the further you fall. And those who fly with eagles have a very long way to fall. And I guess if you are the face of the BBC News department, you have a very long way to fall. Maybe he's a bigger name, therefore a bigger scandal than Noel Clarke or John Barrowman were. I don't know. I'm glad I'm not the one making those decisions.
Yeah, me too. Well, moving on to short topics, and for the first one, I think this is something we can both present on, Dave, because you set me the challenge after we did the trilogy of Lord of the Rings movies last year to watch the Tolkien biopic over the summer, and I did. And so I have thoughts about it. I'm sure you have thoughts about it. Who wants to start?
Well, I might start because I saw it before you did. I saw this biopic in 2019 in the cinema when it first came out,
right,
with Nicholas Hoult and Derek Jacobi and Star Trek's Colm Meaney, Anthony Boyle, who's a favourite upcoming actor of mine, and indeed the son of Georgia Moffat, Ty Tennant. So, quite a star-studded little cast there. I enjoyed it when it came out, but then again, I'm a sucker for stories about, Oxford undergraduates talking around before the war and being twee and intellectual together. That's sort of, catnip for me. So I really did quite enjoy it. I did sort of watch it having not seen or read The Lord of the Rings at the time, and I sort of get a few things that they were intimating and alluding to, but a lot of that stuff kind of passed me by. So it was very interesting for me to go back and watch it, having watched for the Doctor Who show, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and it was particularly interesting because as a first-time watcher of that trilogy, when we were discussing them on the Alternate Galaxies episodes, I did talk about just how much it was clear that Tolkien's World War I experiences had shaped what had happened, his views on battle, his views on leaders, his views on mechanised warfare, his views on the change it brought to society, and all the rest of that was very, very evident. So going back and watching the film again with that meant I did appreciate it on a different level and got, I think, a lot more out of it. What did you think, Rob, as somebody who is steeped in the Lord of the Rings and Tolkien philosophy and mythology, but hadn't seen the movie before?
I've got a few thoughts. I'll throw them out one by one. You can have a crack at all of them. I thought it was a good film.
Yeah.
At first, it's a bit, our hero can do no wrong. He's excellent at languages. When he's pulled away from the countryside to live in Birmingham, he instantly makes a go of it. His mother dies, but it's barely an inconvenience, and the Catholic priest, who isn't sinister or dodgy or anything else Catholic priests are in modern film, he only has his best interests at heart. He sets him up with a new living situation, where of course there's a hot girl in residence, and she's into him. Then he's at school, and the kid who seems to be the school dickhead actually turns out to be quite academic, invites him to the inner circle of highly intelligent, thoughtful young men, and they all become best buddies for life. When you string all those things together at the start of the film, it felt a bit much.
Yeah, that's not unreasonable, yes.
Yeah. The later World War I scenes sold it for me. We do see moments in the trenches all through the film, but when his character's timeline catches up to the breakout of the war and he's reading aloud to the professor and suddenly this student runs out onto the grassy quadrangle and shouts that, war's been declared, and all the young men gather, the juxtaposition of what he's reading and what's happening in front of them, that was very good. Then we have the final meeting of their gang, the TCBS as they're called. They have their photo taken. Then farewell to Edith, he's heading off on the ship. It's that period in history, and I think you just touched on it earlier, I'm very struck by too. This innocence, then marching off to war, and it'll be over in a few weeks. And these stunningly bright young men leaving their colleges to become officers and going into what's just an absolute meat grinder for the next, 4 years. And so many of them are just going to die senselessly. It's ripe for drama, Dave, and that's where the movie really got me, because I'm already open to that topic, and so the film did that in a really good way, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think the World War One stuff was very, very strong. Look, I agree that Tolkien does come across as, the main character of the story, but I guess he is the main character of this story, so I'll forgive a bit of main character syndrome happening there. But look, you're absolutely right. World War One it's a conflict and a horror that I think we are all collectively still quite struggling to come to terms with. I think that as horrific as World War II was, there is this sense that it was good versus evil. The Nazis and Imperial Japan were evil and wicked, and they did need to be defeated, and the sacrifice of that generation to defeat them was a fundamentally good and necessary thing. We all look at World War One and go, what was the bloody point?
Yeah.
What were they fighting over?
And although World War One was fought in several different theatres, a lot of it on the Western Front is just this ongoing meat grinder of two armies facing off month after month after month after month. Whereas World War Two, it's more battles and then armies moving away from one another for periods of time, and you might have something like the Siege of Tobruk, but at other times the armies just aren't engaged with each other.
No, but on the other hand, and this is something that was really brought home to me when I visited Eastern Europe a couple of times in the last few years, you had half of half of Europe, all of Eastern Europe, occupied, which was just, horrendous. And I think until you've been to some of those cities in Eastern Europe and just really sort of begin to understand what they went through, you don't appreciate that. I think for us over here on the sort of British Australian side, we think of World War II as Dunkirk, the Blitz, D-Day. But for half of Europe, it was occupation. For France, it was occupation. So it was all very horrific. We're getting off the point. I think the point is that World War One is just this horror, this utter horror, and frankly, it just seems this sort of pointless horror. And I think the movie does capture that very, very well. The fact that I don't think it's a big spoiler to say that not all of his friends come back, and it's not a case of sort of, well, a couple didn't come back, but I'm getting on with my life, and it's a nice happy ending. It's like they really go into what this meant to him.
Yeah,
and I think that's a very important part of it.
Yeah. Couple more points just to finish. Some bits, though, after I've just praised it for the World War One stuff, other bits didn't quite land. I wouldn't have had him seeing literal dragons, for example, on the World War One battlefield if I was writing this. I think I would have left it to the audience just to watch it and see Tolkien observe a flamethrower and then maybe reach up and grasp the idea, that's kind of like a dragon, isn't it? Rather than, look, it's like a dragon, so here's Tolkien seeing a dragon, and basically just had a more subtle thing going on there, but that's just me. It was a good film. I did like it. And for a bonus thought, the movie simplifies some situations, as many biopics do. I had to read up on this one, Dave, but Geoffrey, for example, is singled out to be very important in the film, the character of Geoffrey. But apparently he didn't join Tolkien's TCBS until he was about to leave high school. He was already enrolled at Oxford. There was actually another kid in the TCBS who died of an illness when they were still at school, and Geoffrey took his place. So the movie sort of erases that earlier kid, sticks in Geoffrey from earlier, makes out that he was chums with Tolkien from this very young age. And, it's not the most egregious thing I've ever seen in a biopic, but it just shows how a viewer could watch this and assume that must be what happened. No, there was more to it. Geoffrey wasn't his great mate from a young age. They were mates, but from an older age, it's quite a big change, actually.
Yeah, look, and I think that they do elevate Geoffrey because, of course, Tolkien did go and have Geoffrey's poems published and did write the foreword for them. So
yes,
there was a sort of a very tangible link there that was very important. Look, I didn't mind the imagery that they had on World War One, but I think it is a very much a, is it to your taste or not sort of thing. The other criticism that I've seen of the film is that some people don't believe it put enough significance on Tolkien's faith. I actually think that it showed the role that the church played in his views and forming who he was relatively well. Those are very difficult things to externalise, and given that they were doing a lot of very overt externalisation of the World War One, I thought maybe there just wasn't room for that. So that's again just a matter of taste. But yeah, look, it was interesting. I was very pleased to watch it again. It was a really nice cast. It's a really fun movie. Well, not a really fun movie. It's a really enjoyable movie to watch in terms of just visually interesting and good actors. I mean, I'll watch Nicholas Hoult and Derek Jacobi in anything. Yeah, that's fantastic actors. So, but seeing it again, having watched The Lord of the Rings, was really good. And hey, Peter Davison's grandson's in it, so that's awesome.
Very good. Moving on, I've got a quick one here, Dave. Real Time Pictures recently promoted a DVD called Star Watch. So I picked it up and I watched it earlier this month. It's basically an hour-long doco and some extras, which boils down to this bloke called Chris Leach back in 1988 filmed a trailer come info dump about a TV series he wanted to get off the ground called Star Watch, which would have John Pertwee as its lead actor. And indeed, it's the Pert who's front and centre in this trailer/info dump piece. Now, Leach is clearly a massive Doctor Who and Thunderbirds fans, so if you think of this show as being the Doctor running the Thunderbirds in an underground cavern below Stonehenge, you're in the ballpark for what the storyline was going to be. The trailer, though, is quite confusing as the Pert comes on seemingly as his character in the series, and then he starts playing all these top-secret videos, which are narrated by himself as seemingly the same character, as if he's telling himself, and then by association the audience, all this information. But if he's him, I don't understand why he'd need to watch a video of himself saying all this stuff, because he'd already know it. But anyway... Put that aside. It went nowhere. They tried to sell it at Cannes. They thought they had some TV interest, but apparently it was just a ploy to stuff up their project somehow. And then Leach, as the showrunner, started having different ideas about what the series could be. He actually renamed it as Sentinel and changed the concept so his trailer didn't fit anymore. The BBC was sort of interested, then they weren't interested. And it's an interesting doco, Dave. I didn't really know anything about this going into it. It could have been Pertwee's last big TV role if it had happened. The doco's got Mike Tucker in it because he helped out with some of the models. Graham Harper pops in to discuss the trailer with a sort of, he puts a director's eye over it and says where it's good and where it's not good, where it might have failed. So yeah, it's not the most blow your socks off documentary you'll ever see, but as a curio, I really quite enjoyed this. Will I ever watch it again? Probably not. But, you know, these pieces from Real Time are pretty cheap by the slice, so I was glad I got it.
Fair enough.
What have you got?
My final little short topic is that earlier this month I had to drive down to Port Fairy for a small weekend away, which is a sort of a 4 and a bit hour drive each way from Melbourne. And so I put on some Big Finish, as recommended by various different podcasts out there. And as I've said before, now that I know some of these podcasts and podcasters, I can pick the Big Finish I want to listen to and I think I might like, which is always much better than wading in at random based on a cool cover or something and finding out that it's terrible, which was what happened a lot in the previous years. So look, I did continue listening to some of those early adventures with the Flames of Cadiz, which is a William Russell, Caroline Ford story set during the whole period leading up to the Spanish Armada. And I thought that was a really good, fun story. I love those history stories. I think it captured the Hartnell era really well. I must admit, I don't know how many people listening are as familiar with that part of history as I am, because I was certainly sitting there going, I think the date's a bit askew here. What's going on? And then found out that was actually a plot point, which was really interesting, because they do sort of talk about the difference between the Spanish Armada and the earlier raids, known as the singeing of the King of Spain's beard. So, you know, that was all very good. That was very enjoyable. I then listened to the first two parts of a trilogy. I first heard about this when Fraser Hines spoke about it at a Sirens of Audio event. He mentioned he'd recorded a couple of Big Finishes with Colin Baker. I thought, that's an interesting idea. And then Too Hot for TV decided to review the trilogy, so I bought the first two. City of Spires wasn't bad. I think it was interesting to hear Colin and Fraser playing off against each other. I'm not quite sure that Jamie was all that well written, but Fraser Hines is always good to listen to. And I did think at the end of it that it was very obvious that the Doctor knew that he was in the first part of a trilogy, so could just leave a whole lot of things unanswered and unsolved and go on, knowing that he'll be back in 2 stories' time to finish the trilogy, presumably. So I thought that was interesting. Wreck of the Titan, which is named after one of my favourite episodes of 1980s Astro Boy, or not, is is also very good, very interesting. I did spend a lot of time, as you obviously meant to, working out what the plot twist was all about and what was going on, and it was definitely a very interesting reveal. Again, Colin and Fraser were very good together. That was fun. So two sort of reasonable adventures. I probably should at some point buy and listen to the third of that trilogy, but I must admit, when Dylan and co on Too Hot for TV reviewed the trilogy, they spent a lot of time going, we know this sounds really fan wanky, but it's not that bad. And I'm sort of going, it does sound really bad, guys, the way you're talking about it. And then they said, Nick Briggs turns up playing himself. And I thought, you know what? I don't need to listen to this.
Oh, no.
So maybe tell me if I really need to listen to the end of that trilogy. But it didn't sound good. So maybe I'm never going to know the ending. But finishing off, I listened to a Peter Purves era Hartnell story, The Dalek Occupation of Winter, and that was brilliant. That was one of the best big finishes I've listened to. It's 60s Daleks done really, really well. It's Hartnell done well. It's a strong story. It's brutal in the way the 60s stuff are. Yeah, that's probably the pick of the four I listened to, but Flames of Cadiz was also really good.
I've heard that Dalek one is good.
Yeah, it's very good. I was genuinely impressed. Even at the end of a 4.5 hour drive back home, I was sitting there sort of going, it's 25 minutes home and half an hour of the story left. I hope the traffic slows down because I want to finish this before I get home. Which, after a 4 hour drive is a lot. So yeah, it was very good.
I've done that with podcasts before, and I've literally driven into another suburb and back just to finish it.
That's true. Terrible.
True story.
That's terrible. But something that's not terrible is our main topic, Rob.
Yes, of course, tonight we're doing The Seeds of Doom as voted for by you, dear listener. We had a poll which had The Seeds of Doom, Invasion of the Dinosaurs, Mummy on the Orient Express, and Vincent and the Doctor. Seeds of Doom won that poll with 34.5%. Invasion of the Dinosaurs was second on 29.5%, then Mummy on 20.9%, and Vincent and the Doctor brought up the rear on 15.1%. So it's Seeds of Doom tonight, Dave.
It is. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah. We like to kick these off with our memories of classic episodes. What are your memories going into The Seeds of Doom?
So I definitely saw this go out on the ABC as a repeat sometime, I want to say, in the late 80s. Mm-hmm. It wasn't part of that 86 run because that finished with Terror of the Zygons, but it did come on, I think, a year or two later. It wasn't a story we had all of on video. I think, as I've told many times, we had episodes depending on what shift Dad was doing at the time. So I think for this one we had sort of episode 1, 5 and 6 or something like that.
Right.
So I didn't know the whole middle of the story until it came out on VHS some years later. It's a story I didn't watch a lot as a kid. I actively disliked it as a kid. So I have grown up with it over time. Interestingly, it's a story that was late to VHS, late to DVD, and is not yet on Blu-ray. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's my memory. I definitely saw it as a youngster, aged probably about 10, on the ABC as a repeat. Didn't like it. That was my first memory.
This is really interesting because I've jotted down that it didn't gel with me as a young'un either.
Yeah, wow, okay.
It wasn't over my head per se.
Hey, there's not a lot to get.
But it wasn't in my wheelhouse.
Yes, I think that's a better way of putting it, yes.
I think that's because there's a lot of conversation in it and it's drawn out across 6 episodes. There's no space or lasers. It's just running around a country house with some bloody plants. It's one of those stories at first I didn't have much interest in watching. Maybe didn't even stick with it properly the first time it was on TV, and maybe when we tried to watch it at the club I wasn't that interested in it. It's really hard to remember specifically, but that kind of vibe is in absolutely the right direction. But over time, I came to really like it for a lot of different reasons, which I'm sure we'll tease out over the next half hour or 40 minutes. And that's my opening gambit. Yeah,
so to move on to my memory of it, to my opening thought, I have long said, because I'm one of those people that, if you ask me for my favourite of a Doctor era, I'll tell you. You ask me for my least favourite, I'll also tell you. So I like to be absolute like that. I'm that kind of person. And if you said to me, name your favourite Tom Baker story, for some years now, I would have said The Seeds of Doom. Of course, it's very close. There are lots of other ones that are very, very good as well. But I've always just had The Seeds of Doom up there as an adult. And I think that this is peak Doctor Who under Tom Baker. It is the peak of Tom Baker, I think, before you start to see a very slow but obvious decline in the way that he performs the role of the Doctor. He's now been there for 2 full seasons, and he's at his absolute strength before he starts to get a bit too big. And, well, we all know where Tom Baker goes.
Yeah.
I think it is the peak of Robert Holmes as the script editor. It is the peak of Philip Hinchcliffe as the producer. It is the peak of Liz Sladen, only a couple of stories before she leaves. All of these great aspects of Doctor Who are all peaking at this point in this story. And then there's a whole lot of other things that go into it. And I will also say, I think that this is a story that's easy to pick as your favourite of an era because it does stand out. It's not an example of typical Tom Baker Doctor Who done very, very well. It is an example of atypical Doctor Who done very, very well. So it does stand out in the way that something like The Caves of Androzani stands out in the Davison era. It is one of those sort of ones. Now, I have thoughts on why and how it stands out, but again, that's my opening before we go in a bit further.
My opening thought on it is I want to mention how good it looks. I mean, I concur with everything you've just said. But from the start, there's a lot to like. The Antarctic base looks really good. The helicopter landing looks surprisingly good and not at all like it's something out of Thunderbirds. The outdoor stuff is great. They seem to have covered a quarry in fake snow, and when the guys from the other base are rescuing Sarah and the Doctor after that explosion, it looks really good. And then later in the stories, all the stuff shot around the manor house, that, well, it always looks fab in Doctor Who, doesn't it? So I don't think we can understate that the story just looks good. Not from a modern, I can see all the money on the screen angle, but just a simple, hey, this looks really good for 70s Doctor Who. So throw that on top of everything you just said about it.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, this is a time when the budget was probably at its peak in classic Doctor Who because they were getting all those colour licenses that they'd hoarded all that money that Barry Letts had hoarded during the Pertwee years, and now Hinchcliffe had it, and inflation wasn't yet kicking in. No. So we weren't sort of starting to get that decline in the power of the budget. So it is probably the most expensive season of Doctor Who in sort of real monetary, on the ground terms that we got. It's directed by Douglas Camfield. Let's not forget about that.
Yeah.
The music is by Jeffrey Bergen. We'll be talking about that. But I agree. I think it just looks spectacular. I think the model work is fantastic, particularly in Antarctica. I think that the Crinoid pod is brilliantly done. I think the Crinoid on the house at the end, those 1 or 2 model shots, is very, very good. The intermediate Crinoid, the 12-foot high Crinoid rather than the 30-foot high Crinoid or the 6-foot high Crinoid, that's the weaker part.
The Axon spray painted green.
Oh, I don't mind the Axon spray painted green. It's the next stage.
The next stage.
Okay. Sort of the blob Crinoid that's probably the weakest one of the Crinoids. But yeah, look, I think it looks really, really good. Antarctica is done as well as you can on a Doctor Who budget. The snow mostly looks good. There's a couple of moments, I think, like when Tommy's digging the second pod out, where it's very obvious he's just digging through a pile of broken up polystyrene, and occasionally people do get it in their hair. But again, these weren't designed to watch on an 85-inch television on DVD, so you forgive it. But I mean, yeah, I think it looks great, as you said. The model work's great. Antarctica's great. The filming around London is great. It does look like expensive Doctor Who by classic era standards.
Yeah, I agree with all that. Where do you want to go now? I've got comments on everything.
Look, let's keep going on why it didn't work for us as kids, because I think that's an important thing to tease out. And I'm going to say that apart from it being all the things you said, it's a cerebral sort of story. It's a lot of standing around talking urgently. Now, when you're an adult, that standing around talking urgently is brilliant and dramatic and witty and clever, and I just revel in it. As a kid, I don't think you quite get that, but I will also say it is, if not the most upsetting story that I watched as a kid, it is certainly up there as a contender. And I've often said, and I've said this over many years, the thing about violence and death in Doctor Who is that if it's quick and fake, it's okay. So, laser gun, bang, you're dead, fall down, we move on. Who cares? It's television, you get that. But when somebody is suffering, when death is coming, and the individual is trying to cope with a knowledge that death is coming, and they're suffering, and you linger on it, that is disturbing and that is upsetting. So something like Oscar Botcherby being stabbed and slowly bleeding out on a restaurant floor, as he cries and his girlfriend cries, or his friend cries, whatever, like that is upsetting to a child. And the threat of being taken over by a Crinoid is genuinely scary. But the scenes with Keela, are one of the only, if not the only times as a kid watching Classic Who where I've had to just go, nah, I'm out. I'm not watching this anymore. This is too horrific. The idea of somebody begging to be let go and suffering and being transformed is horrific as an adult, and as a kid it was too much. So this was a very upsetting story for 10-year-old me.
Yeah. I mean, there's no shying away from the fact this story has quite a body count and some pretty horrific stuff. The one that always sticks with me is the unit sergeant who's tossed into the mulcher. And you think, nah, they're not going to do that to a unit bloke. And they do. You know, I think it does happen off camera, but it still happens. And I guess that ratchets up the tension a little when the Doctor and Sarah are in there later. We've seen one person mulched. It's possible. I guess we still know deep down our heroes won't be, but it still feels awful to have them in a situation where we've already seen it end badly for someone else. Yeah, that's the bit that stuck with me in terms of the violence. But gosh, there's violence all the way through.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example. And don't forget, for 5 minutes, they did consider making that Sergeant Benton.
Is that right?
Apparently, yes.
Wow.
So just imagine that. But you know, I'm reminded that Hinchcliffe did cut part of that Keeler scene, because when the butler brings in the plate of raw meat, which is disgusting, apparently, after saying, no, I'm not going to do it, he then gives in to the crinoid and starts eating the raw meat. But even Hinchcliffe was able to, you know what, no, we're not doing that. We're not going to go that far.
Interesting. And when we talked about Ark in Space, I think we talked about a scene that Hinchcliffe nixed before it went all the way through, yeah. Yes,
Hinchcliffe does talk about 3 occasions when he had to make a cut. I think they're 2 of them, and the other one's probably when he had to recut the cliffhanger of The Deadly Assassin.
Yeah. I did speak earlier about how the show didn't connect with me when I was young, so now that you brought it up, when I was watching this again, I was struck by the way it starts with a lot of talking and a lot of story before we even see the Doctor. You know, and he's not even doing anything dynamic. He's not landing at the base and wondering what's going on and investigating. He's just sitting in someone's office playing with a yo-yo and doing more talking. It's a story that really takes its time, and that's good as it fills out the 6 parts without feeling overly padded, because one of my big bugbears over many 6-part stories is you can see the padding and you think, how good would this have been as like a 4-parter? But here you get to episode 4 and you think, okay, we've done X, Y, and Z. Could we wrap it up here? And actually you couldn't. You definitely need 5 episodes to wrap it up, and even then it would feel slightly rushed. So I think that 6-part length is justified here, and I do appreciate that, although when I was younger, a 6-part story just felt so epic. But it does create the kind of story you might not want to slip on regularly because of that length. You know, and do a lot of repeat views at the same time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I agree. As a kid, 6-parters were a lot harder to sort of to work your way through. And as a kid, the fact that it's a 2-parter plus a 4-parter doesn't really land. As an adult, you get, oh yeah, there's a nice little 2-parter. Now we've got the 4-parter to break it all up. And Hinchcliffe does do that very, very well in his era. But as a kid, it's just 6 long parts. I agree that the opening is really well done and the time it takes is really good. And the effect of that is that by the time the Doctor arrives in Antarctica, we feel like we know Winlet and Moberly and Stevenson. They're real people and we're scared for them. And when the Doctor turns around and says, you're going to have to perform an amputation, and the guy's just terrified, like this is a real person.
Yeah.
When Stevenson is sort of realising that his ego, his vanity as a scientist, killed his mate and could wipe out humanity, it feels real. So I think that taking time to get to know those 3 in that closed environment is really, really effective. Taking the time to get to know Keeler and Scorby, and we'll talk more about them later, is really effective. And at the same time, it's funny you say the Doctor comes in late, because I was thinking, I had a note here, that we don't go through all the sort of the usual later unit stuff of, Doctor, we need you to go and investigate this pod. I don't want to go and investigate this pod. This is boring. Doctor, it could be alien. Oh, hang on. And then, you know, okay, well, I'll go and meet this person. Now I'll find out. It's just, he's in the office. He's already had that conversation. And he's like, oh, wow, photo. Okay, I need to get going there. And I think that although some viewers have said, oh, you know, it starts like an episode of something else. The Doctor's just on missions now. I think, well, no. We've seen this before. We've just cut off that boring bit at the front.
I wonder where the helicopter came from. Wouldn't have come from Tasmania. It must have been on a ship or something.
I mean, at that stage, it could have come from Tasmania. It could have come from Tierra del Fuego.
Oh, okay.
Or it could have come from a ship. Because don't forget, Hobart is the capital city of the Australian Antarctic Territory.
That is true.
So, that's a really, really good point, yes.
Oh, where can we go next? I've got so many notes here, Dave. How about Dougie Bloody Camfield? I mean, you mentioned him earlier. I made a note on it. He is behind the lens, and sadly, it's the last time he ever does Doctor Who. Conversely, this is the last time before Dudley Simpson steps in for a long, long time. So one guy's sort of leaving and another guy is about to enter. That's kind of interesting, but by the by, I think Dougie's got to take some of the credit for this looking so good. I mean, the storyline and the locations do help. It's kind of hard to balls up some of that stuff, but when you're watching it and there's something gnawing at your brain along the lines of, this is really good 70s Who. Why is it so good? I think the secret herbs and spices in the background are Dougie Camfield.
I think that's absolutely right. I think the cuts he does are really good. I think the way that he frames a lot of shots is really good. So he makes the base in Antarctica seem small and claustrophobic. He makes the gardens seem terrifying, even when they're big and expansive. He makes the Krynoid look big and terrifying. He shoots in the dark. The night shots are really, really good. But he's also able to get the performances out of the characters. We'll talk more about the characters as we go on, I'm sure. But he gets the right performances. He makes sure that Scorby is a three-dimensional character. He makes sure that Keeler is a three-dimensional character. And there's just lots of really lovely bits going on. When the Doctor works his way out of problems, he takes the time to sort of show us how it's going on. When people are scared, we get a moment to linger on them being scared. But even just a little detail. So when Scorby has taken the SLR rifle out of the cabinet, going, oh, look what they've got here. And I'm watching him and I'm going, because I know a bit about SLR rifles from my time in the cadets, I'm going, he's actually properly stripping that and taking out the firing pin. That's very good attention to detail. Well done. And that's got to be Douglas, absolutely.
Yeah, do you think Dougie showed him?
I wouldn't be shocked at all.
Yeah.
No, that's not how you do it. Here, right, clear, right, fine, open that firing pin. I thought, it's just that level of attention to detail is good, but although it's a long thing to watch as a kid, as an adult, it doesn't drag. I watched this in one session, bar a couple of breaks, to sort of go to the toilet and get a drink or whatever. I watched this in one session without blinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very watchable. Very watchable.
Something else that makes it very watchable is the wit. And it's not a story I really thought of as being particularly funny or witty, because let's face it, it is more than funny and witty. It is grim and dark and upsetting. So I'm not saying it is a funny story to story, but all the way through there is a wit and a black humour. Stuff like the comment at the end of everything, even your pension, is just a wonderful line, very well delivered. Tom gets to do his little moment out of duck soup where he picks up the phone, he's busy, and slams it back down again. The wonderful allusion to the importance of being earnest, a car boot, a Daimler car boot, the car is immaterial. They're sort of wonderful, and they're the sort of references that I can't imagine television, let alone Doctor Who, doing these days, of sort of going, let's just put in a duck soup reference, let's put in an Oscar Wilde reference, knowing that a lot of the audience at home will be going, oh, nicely played, I like that.
Well, the latter one in Australia wouldn't fly because we never called Markets car boots or anything, so people say, what's a car boot?
Yeah, no, so look, it's just really, really witty, and as I say, it's Tom at the height of his powers, where he's not doing the funny lines in a funny way. If anything, he's doing the funny lines in an angry way, and it's perfect.
Yeah, I like this era of Tom. There's still the silliness, and you would not mistake him for the previous three Doctors by any means. But as I think you were alluding to earlier, he's not out of control, Tom. It's this really good mix of a Doctor who doesn't act like a child but still has a sense of fun. He has the wickedly funny lines. If I could only have one version of Tom, it would be this version all day long.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not saying that he is angry all the way through, far from it. He's alien all the way through, which is fantastic. The line as he departs the World Ecology Bureau, don't touch pod, could be dangerous, is not played in a silly way, but it's alien and it's sort of light and it's a little bit fun, but you go, well, how serious is he? And then you get to where he is discovering what's going on and just, stuff like, you must help yourselves. Very underplayed. Very underplayed.
Yeah, and when he needs to be an action man, he's straight into it. It's my Return of the Jedi moment. You know, on Jabba's sail barge, if I can go off on a tangent, when
Sure.
Luke Skywalker bounces off the gangplank, lands on the skiff, grabs the lightsaber, ignites it. Boba Fett's like, I'm in, and just flies straight over to engage, right? He's straight in. And this has the scene where the Krynoid is going to touch Sarah, and the Doctor's like, nah, he's straight through the window. He's straight through the skylight, and crashing down. And that's my Boba Fett moment for Tom in this. It's like, wow, he's a man of action. This is fantastic.
He is a man of action. He does it really, really well, because at that point, all he's doing is saving Sarah. So, yep, goes for it. The moment when he beats up and punches out the chauffeur, there's that half a beat pause before he brings his fist down. And you go, yep, good. The Doctor's just going, do I have to knock him out? Yeah, I have to knock him out. Right, here I go. But it's not something he's reveling in or he's enjoying, which I think is the right balance to do. There's the stuff where he's angry at Scorby, and he does righteous anger, so it would make no difference. That's sort of wonderful sort of aggressive thing. But then when Scorby's beating him up and just, it's a really sort of, if you like a bit of action, it's a very well played scene. A bit unsteady on your feet, Doctor, and just sort of throwing him into the garbage cans. You're going, well, this is not a punch-on, because the Doctor wouldn't get into a fight. But the Doctor is being beaten up, and that's nasty. Yeah, it's the right balance.
Yeah, when he hits those garbage cans, I was looking and thinking, I think they're real garbage cans. I don't think they're like stunt garbage cans, like made of cardboard or something.
No, look, I don't know how they played it, but it is full on, and I like, as a sad 40-something-year-old who does Doctor Who podcast, I like that it's serious. I like that it feels a bit adult. I didn't as a kid.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the character of Scorby then. He is interesting because he's the kind of character I don't think we would have seen 10 years earlier in Doctor Who or during those previous 10 years. I think as a mercenary, it's tying into maybe some of the African conflicts that were happening in the 70s, and mercenaries and soldiers of fortune were becoming a thing, and they were getting written into fiction and into TV shows, and that's kind of where the Scorby character comes from. He's just not like an East End thug. He is one of these mercenary types who people might be hearing about on the news at this time in the mid-70s.
Yeah, he's a brilliant character. He is actually very, very smart. He's very canny. He's very effective. It's only because he came up against the Doctor, who is even more smart and canny and effective, that he isn't completely successful in all of his missions. He's sympathetic is the wrong word, but he feels like a real character. He's gone, well, I've got some skills. I can make money using those skills, and who cares about morality? I'm a rich man now, and that's really effective. I think his death is really, really cool, and I like the sort of the slow unwinding of the character as he realises that he's probably not going to make it out, and that's really well played. It's really, really effective. I like the fact that he can make a Molotov cocktail on children's television. Yes, a Molotov cocktail. Sure, let me just show kids how to make a Molotov cocktail on screen. It's quite extraordinary, but it's really, really good. I'm aware that John Challis is a much bigger name in the UK, particularly for his role in Only Fools and Horses, which I don't remember ever being particularly big out here. He's not an actor I've sort of recognised from anything outside of Doctor Who.
No, me either, to be honest.
Let's keep going with the characters then, because I want to talk about Harrison Chase.
Please.
So, I had a couple of thoughts on Harrison Chase. One, he's a wonderful camp villain, but he's genuinely ruthless, genuinely terrifying, genuinely insane, and I think that's wonderful. I think there's a lot of nonsense talked about Harrison Chase, and again, to sort of talk about the evolution of my relationship with the character. As a kid, I was just indifferent to him. He was just a strange guy in a suit with a big tie that you didn't really understand. Then later on you go, oh, wow, he's completely insane and he's been taken over by the Krynoid, and that's really interesting. And then you read all this stuff in Doctor Who publications about, well, actually, he has he has a sexual relationship with the Krynoid. And you go, oh, wow, he does. That's profound. And now I watch and go, of course he doesn't. he's not sitting there sort of, getting off on the Krynoid. He's just completely nuts. And
Dave, he's going to be playing in his green cathedral.
Oh, no, that's nonsense. It's just, he's just been taken over by the monster because he's the baddie and he has to go a bit too lowly at the end of it. I think there is a lot of nonsense played in there. Look, I'm aware that the actor who played him was an openly gay man. He was, I think at the time this was being made, he was living with his partner for 15 years. So are people seeing that part of the actor and making assumptions? Possibly. I don't think it's there. And the second point, before I let you weigh in on Chase, Rob, is I just was also thinking, although it's a great performance, I do think it is a little bit two-dimensional in terms of the character. And if you're doing this now, they've probably gone a little bit too far the other direction. If you're doing this now, he'd either be a foppish member of the aristocracy who's got too much money and too much power, or he would be the CEO of a company, like somebody out of the Alex Rider TV series and novels, all the way to, he's the good multinational CEO that's actually got some really dodgy stuff going on, and he's the one that funded saving the whales and saving the rainforest, but he's very dodgy behind the scenes. Like, there would be all that stuff going on that I think we don't see. That's not what we did in the 1970s. I'm relaxed about it. I was just sitting there watching it going, it would be fascinating to know a bit more about who this guy is.
Yeah. I find him an interesting baddie insofar as, yes, he's a bit bonkers, but it's never that overplayed. You think of when he's performing that symphony for his plants. If this was New Who, I think he'd be like, and now the symphony for my plants. Yeah. And he'd probably have a cape. He'd probably flick the cape over his shoulders as he was saying it and gurn all the way through as he played so that it was, basically comedy. But here, although you might laugh at it, it's not being played for laughs. He is just a bit bonkers. Okay, he is bonkers. We have this guy doing bonkers stuff, but it's in such a straight way. You're sort of left guessing quite how mad he is. I find that interesting.
Yeah, and look, they certainly weave that through very nicely right from the start. The comment that he makes to Dunbar about bonsai, or torture of plants, you sort of go, well, that's an interesting perspective, but no. No. But I get where you're coming from, but no. So, that sort of stuff's really interesting. His stuff about recycling experiments and the sincerity is all very good, but contrasted with the fact he's happy to put a human being into his grinder. So look, it's really good. I did wonder if it went a little bit too far in the final episode where he's sort of doing all these animal feeds. I sort of thought, is that a little bit too much? I don't know. Look, I think it's great. He's very memorable. It's a wonderful performance. Are we analysing him too far? Probably. I don't think he's necessarily gay. I certainly don't think that he was jerking off to a crinoid. And, look, I know that made for a lot of very cerebral essays back in the 90s, but no, I don't think so.
Yeah, okay. How about Sarah? I don't think she gets to do a lot in this, but I still think it's a pretty good outing for her in terms of she's by the Doctor's side. She's not screaming. She's right in the fight. You don't leave this story thinking, gosh, I wouldn't want to be lugging her around the universe with me, Although she doesn't do anything overly brilliant, she's really solid and dependable for the Doctor, which for this era is absolutely the companion's role. It's very different today where the companion is basically the focal point, but here she's in that supporting role. I think she's really great at it.
This is Miss Smith, my best friend.
Yeah, is that the first time we hear the Doctor say that?
Oh, I think it could be.
It could be.
It could be, yes. No, look, she's wonderful. It isn't her story, but she gets a lot of good scenes. She's the one, when the Doctor is being alien in Antarctica, who has to turn to the scientists and go, no, this is what he's saying. This is what he means. Understand him. She sort of translates for the Doctor, which is really good. If you ever wanted examples of Liz Sladen, as she famously could, being brave and terrified at the same time, the cliffhanger to part 3... which is just, that's a wonderful cliffhanger. That is absolutely chilling. I must see what happens when the crinoid touches human flesh. And you see Sarah just utterly terrified, but not unbrave either. It's a wonderful performance. Her scene with Keeler, she sells the horror of that, as I was discussing. She gets to one-up Scorby. When he's the one who falls apart, she's the one that pulls it all together. Yeah, it's not her story, but I think she's got nothing to be ashamed of at all.
I remember the first time, maybe not the first time I saw this, but maybe the first time I can remember seeing this, her coming to his bedside where he's almost fully transformed, but he's still a bit human. And I thought, is this going to be like Robot, where she befriends the robot? Is she going to befriend the monster here?
Oh,
I was
right.
wondering if it was going to go in that area, but it doesn't, of course, because he transforms, and that's the end of that.
Yes, no, yeah, Yes.
Story-wise, is it worth mentioning something that comes up in a lot of Doctor Who fan publications, so I think we're contractually obliged to mention this, the Man-Eater of Surrey Green episode of The Avengers, which went out a decade earlier. Let me read you and the listeners the blurb, Dave. A man-eating plant from outer space lands in Middle England and takes several top horticulturalists as prisoners in an effort to germinate the earth. If that doesn't sound at least 50% of Seeds of Doom, I don't know what does.
Yeah, look, I think the central conceit of both stories is obviously the same, and I'm not going to argue that's not the case. I think the execution is vastly different. I know this is the story that a lot of fans do compare to the Avengers. I actually don't think that's quite correct. Now, I will note that I'm not a massive fan of the Avengers. I enjoy the Avengers, but I haven't seen a lot of Avengers. I've really just mostly seen the Emma Peel seasons that were broadcast on repeat in Australia when I was in my teens.
And they would have been the colour ones, I imagine.
No, they broadcast the black and white and the colour ones.
Did they really? Okay.
Certainly I have seen the black and white ones. Maybe that was on video. But anyway, the point is, I've mainly seen Emma Peel. I haven't seen sort of like super early or super late Avengers. But I think as I watched this, there's a level of nastiness and violence that I couldn't quite imagine in the Avengers. The Avengers is all sort of, very sort of genteel staged fights with umbrellas.
It's pretty campy.
Yeah, and shooting things out of people's hands and and the like. John Pertwee getting zapped by a laser gun. It's not punch-ons, it's not suffering. I don't think the tone of this is remotely like the Avengers. Those who are bigger fans of the Avengers, please, if you think it is tell me that I'm wrong. But I don't really buy it. I think the execution's quite different. I think the stakes are quite differently done. I think the villain's quite different. So, yeah, look, is it the same central conceit? Of course it is. Let's face it, most of the Hinchcliffe era has the same central conceit as something else.
Well, I was going to say there's an element of Day of the Triffids in here as well, but, that's okay. Brainer Morbius is doing Frankenstein, for example.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it can't be accused of riffing off the 1981 adaptation of Triffids because it hadn't been made yet. So
there you go.
Yeah, look, I think it does sort of riff on all that sort of stuff, and it's very good in that sort of sense. A character I just want to mention is Keeler.
Yes.
I think that for a long time I thought he was sort of the goody or the hapless individual, but you realise, even though there's a few times where he says, no, I'm not going along with this, he then gives in and goes along with it. There are a number of times when he could have just said, you know what, I'm leaving. What are you going to do, Mr. Chase? You get to shoot me? I'm retiring. I'm resigning. I'm gone. Goodbye. I'm not playing part of this anymore. And he doesn't. And so I don't think that, whilst he's not as wicked as Scorby or as Chase, he's not the goody either.
No, but that is an interesting kind of character. One where we sort of feel sympathy for him. We sort of think he might be in this direction, but he's not really in that direction, but he's also not a real baddie either. There's some ambiguity there that I think is really cool. I think it makes the characters more realistic. People in real life aren't always black and white.
No, absolutely. At the end of the day, he's not evil or wicked. He's just weak. And the thing that is always fascinating about those characters is that we all have that moment of, well, how strong or weak would we be? Would we walk away from our job and our livelihood just because it was all getting a little bit nasty? What would be our line? And so I think that does make it fascinating. So, yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Dave, you were talking earlier about how the Mulcher scene could have been Benton, and we talked a bit about Unit, but I just want to mention, because I made a note about it, we don't get the Unit family here. We get Unit, but it's no one we recognise, and it's the last time we see them until the Five Doctors. That's only a cameo. It'll be about, I think, 14 years until we see them actually in action again, firing guns and jumping around. In Sylvester's final season, that's quite a long break between drinks. Yeah,
I like it when the Doctor interacts with civilization in this sort of way. I like his interactions with the World Ecology Bureau. I think they're really, really good. I think that the use of Unit is very natural. I like the scene where he has to convince them that the Crinoid is actually controlling plants and this is serious. I think as a kid the laser gun scene was something that I really enjoyed. So look, would it be nice if the Brigadier was there? Sure. I must admit I don't really miss him. Nicholas Courtney apparently was on a tour on the stage at that stage, so be it. I think it's fine. I like the spectacle of the RAF being called in to blow it up. And let's be honest, that's what would happen. You would say, okay, let's get the RAF to come and blow this thing up. Is it a weak ending? Look, maybe, but for me, the tension leading up to the Doctor almost being mulched is kind of the big dramatic thing, and then the tension of can they escape through the trees and all the rest of it, I think is big enough build up, and then there's a big explosion. It's probably the only way you could do it. The Doctor isn't going to talk the Krynoid down, let's face it. So it all works for me.
Do you think it's intentional that there is a line in there about guns and bombs, I think not always being the answer, but in the end the answer is a bunch of missiles from the RAF? It's something that made me sort of chuckle afterwards.
Yeah, I think it is. And it is that cheat about, Sylvester McCoy says, my Doctor doesn't use guns. She can use a gun, but my Doctor doesn't. And I think it's that thing of, the Doctor wouldn't blow somebody up. The RAF can blow a Krynoid up. Scorby can make a Molotov cocktail. I'm not going to do it. That's an important line. And that would bring me to my final thought, but I've got one more dot point to talk about first, Rob.
Yes.
And that is, we mentioned it in passing, but let's actually mention it again properly. Jeffrey Burgeon's music, a wonderful composer. He did Brideshead Revisited, he did The Chronicles of Narnia, which are two things that stand out in my memory, and a number of many other things as well. I had the CD of his work back when I was younger. He only does this in The Terror of the Zygons. It is a welcome change from Dudley Simpson. I love Dudley Simpson, but I love the fact that we mix it up. I've always said one of the problems with modern Doctor Who is that they have the same house style every single time. I like it when they have different composers coming in with different spins on the show. I think that's really good. It's what J&T gets right in the early part of his time. It's what they get right here. And yeah, just the flutes and the woodwind to convey that woody sort of plant-like environment and that ethereal quality in Antarctica is just perfectly done. And it's just yet another thing where everything has gone right, including the music, to just make this both excellent but unique, which brings me to my final point. Can I keep going on that thought to sum up, Rob?
Keep rolling, Dave.
I'll keep rolling. So look, could Doctor Who be like this every single week? The answer is no. And that's a good thing. I said at the start that this is a story that is easy to put at the top of the list because it stands out as being different. It is a slightly nastier tone than Doctor Who would normally get. It is produced in a way that is slightly different again. And straying from the house style is a really important thing. There are other stories that stray from the house style and are a disaster. Mm-hmm. This strays from the house style and it all works. I don't think Doctor Who could be like this every time, but this is Doctor Who for grown-ups. I think we've demonstrated by saying we bloody love this as adults, and we didn't bloody love it as kids. And I think that demonstrates that it is a story that is perfect for us as fans in our age group. It lets us pretend that we're not watching a kid show. It lets us sort of get down and have a bit of nastiness. It lets Tom be Tom. It's full on, it's well made, everything comes together, but it couldn't always be like this. It is a different story.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of Doctor Who, isn't it, in a nutshell? It does end on a clanger though, Dave, which has always bothered me. They're back in Antarctica, and the reason given is the TARDIS hasn't been reset from where it last went, but they never took the TARDIS there in the first place. And it's like, wow, why did you drop the ball right at the end? Why?
I'm going to disagree.
Are you?
And say that one of the things I do remember enjoying when I was a kid was the light-hearted ending. And I remember my dad and I turning to each other and having a little chuckle at the sort of the fun ending that was there when it was broadcast. And we weren't sitting there going, hang on, that makes no sense, which we do now. So I think that on broadcast that was a perfectly fine ending. And I think it also was perhaps a necessary ending because it's been so horrific. You don't want to walk out going, oh God, I just want to go and kill myself now. You want to walk out going, oh, well, that was another fun, jolly jape of an adventure. And we'll be back for another adventure of Doctor Who next week, or actually a couple of months' time, given it was the season finale. At least in Australia, we just kept playing it again and again. I think it's necessary, but yes, it is a clanger. I get that. It doesn't hold up.
Okay, so you were like, oh, Sarah's in her swimmers. She's not getting hypothermia.
Yeah. Oh, look, she's in her swimmers. They've gone to the wrong place. They've made a funny gag at the end. Oh, classic Tom Baker, classic Fourth Doctor. Isn't this fun? Yeah, I'll tune in next week. I don't mind that I've been scared witless all through it. No, it'll be fine next week.
So, Dave, in summary, I can't say that this is a forgotten gem or it's a diamond in the rough or any of those other things I might say sometimes, because I think the story is quite well regarded. It might get forgotten a little, but only a little, as there's some pretty big name stories around it. And there's more to come in the season ahead. And as a six-parter, as I alluded earlier, maybe people don't put this on as often for comfort viewing, but I'm really clutching at straws. I think people know this one. They know it's good. And it doesn't need rediscovery or reevaluation or anything like it. So for a score, it's easily 8 out of 10, maybe 8.5 out of 10 for me. And I may even still be slightly underselling it.
Look, that's all very fair and reasonable. Something I've said a number of times over the last decade, Rob, is one thing that we sometimes neglect to do as Doctor Who fans is go back and watch the classics, go back and watch the favourites. We watch the ones we haven't seen for a while, or the ones we think maybe it deserves a reevaluation, or we watch the ones that are comfortable to watch, but it's sometimes something we forget to do. Just go on and put on a proper die-hard classic. And I think this is a proper die-hard classic. There is nothing I would change about it unless we're getting down to the level, maybe the polystyrene snow could have been a bit better. I mean, we haven't even mentioned Amelia Ducar, for goodness sake. There's so much good in this. There's nothing I would change. It's an A+ for me. And I think if you're a long-term Doctor Who fan who occasionally is not quite sure where you and the series are going in your relationship, do yourself a favour and put on a stone cold classic that you love and remember why you enjoyed this show, because when this show is well made, well acted, well written and well produced, as this undoubtedly is, this show is great and worthy of doing a podcast about.
Yeah, that's why we're here.
Why we're here.
Brilliant. Others who are also here are our listeners, Dave, and we've got some messages from them. Will I lead off with these tonight?
Please go for it.
Okay, this first listener message comes from Michael Sunderland, who writes to us via X. He says, "Hi, I spent the last few days listening to your edited monthly main topic videos on YouTube. Brilliant idea, and it's like starting to listen to the podcast from scratch. Just wanted to say thanks."
Well, thank you, Michael. You're welcome.
Yeah, no, it is fun sometimes if you just want to hear one of our topics without all the guff beforehand. Just pull up YouTube, you can find them there. Yeah.
We have a message from Constable Hansy, who comments on our YouTube episode about top funny stories. "Hi, I'm struggling here. I'm not an Adams fan at all, so I wouldn't choose any of his stories personally.
Wow.
The arc is funny, especially the hopeless monoids plotting between themselves. All that stuff in episodes 3 or 4, plus that fight. Carnival of Monsters makes me chuckle, especially the 3 Interminorans with their one must vernacular and dodgy plotting. The Romans, yes, no doubt funny. Very funny in spite of the darkness. This is just me, but I do find the invisible enemy unintentionally funny, especially when it gets to the stage where they're wheeling around a stroppy virus. Last, the Ribos operation. More Holmes double act scripting, but I'm reaching a bit with that one. Thank you, Constable Hansy. Look, it's as we said in the Listmakers episode. Comedy is very personal."
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Mike Solko writes to us via Blue Sky, also about our top funny episodes. "To answer Dave's question, I usually think on the topic over the month and have a rough list before listening." That must have been your question about how people think about their snaps with us, Dave.
Yep.
This time around, he's going for number 1, City of Death, number 2, The Chase, number 3, Love and Monsters, number 4, The Demons, number 5, Delta and the Bannerman. And he says of City of Death, "I showed City of Death to an ex-girlfriend as a Who intro. She preferred Creature from the Pit." P.S. A lot of Tom's stories are full of great quips despite the overall tone. Seeds of Doom very nearly made my list for this reason.
Very topical and appropriate, Mark. Thank you.
Yes.
We have an email from JC17.
I think this is the same JC17 who wrote the review earlier in the show.
Oh, fantastic. Dear Rob and Dave, I've really enjoyed listening to your podcast this past year and just want to express that a bit by emailing you this message. I recently finished my own quote-unquote flight through entirety, is that trademarked? Through the classic series over the past 2 years and had such an absolute blast seeing all those wonderful stories. I don't know anyone else who watches, so allow me to develop a parasocial relationship through this email. Favourite Doctor? Impossible to choose, but probably the second. Favourite story? Man, that's tough too. 7 out of 10 times I'll say The Ambassadors of Death. Wow. Favourite companion? Leela. Underrated gem? The Faceless Ones. One thing I especially enjoy in your episodes is that you take the time to look back at your first experiences with a story, especially after I've just completed a rewatch using BritBox plus the Internet Archives for recons. Hearing your stories put things in perspective. Hearing the stories of hunting for VHS copies just to strain to see them as a second or third version copy turns the act of watching Doctor Who into an adventure in itself. Super cool to hear about. And as time goes on, those memories become more and more important to be recorded in a podcast like this so that future fans will get that appreciation as well. Some ideas for the Hat of Rassilon. In honour of your episode on the Bristol Boys, what do you think are the 5 strangest televised stories? Times when Doctor Who really went out there. I just finished listening to the Big Finish story, Ish, which was fantastic. It got me thinking, in order to see more of Colin, what are your top 5 guest roles that you would have recast with Colin instead? Then, just a fun one, what are the top 5 things you would most want in your pockets during a base under siege in the Arctic? Specifically, Britannicus base at the time of the Ice Warriors. Thanks again, JC17. Welcome to our parasocial relationship, JC17. You're very welcome. Really interesting. I love The Ambassadors of Death. I agree, The Faceless Ones is overrated. Leela's not really on my list, so yeah, some different thoughts. But yeah, that's really cool, especially the stuff you say about context, which I hadn't thought of it like that before.
I like these questions for the Hat of Rassilon, especially the Colin Baker one for some reason. That tickles me.
Yes, they will be going in the hat.
Okay. Dave, we round out episodes with what we've been watching. I'll go first. A few things I would have mentioned last time I was on the show, except I wasn't on the show last time, of course. Some of my beloved Japanese series like Akira and Aro ended their first seasons around January. I also watched a quirky Japanese series about an airline pilot called Good Luck, which was quite fun. What else? I watched the final season of His Dark Materials, a lazy 2 years after it came out, and that really wrapped things up nicely. I started a rewatch of Grange Hill and blazed through seasons 1 and 2, but then I got a bit stuck when my wife decided it was time to finally watch The West Wing, and in a month of watching, I've made it into season 6 of 7 seasons.
Incredible.
We've been knocking over 3 or 4 a day.
It's very easy to do.
I've just found it so watchable.
It's a brilliant show. It's in my top 10, possibly my top 5 or 6. It's a show I've watched all the way through 4, 5, 6 times over the years.
I can see why.
So yeah, very easy. Look, it's one of those shows you go, I'm just going to watch this episode. Suddenly you've watched a season.
Yeah. And finally, Cobra Kai's final episodes dropped. I can't say enough good things about this show. From day one, it's had heart and soul and humour, and it's bucked the trends of modern Hollywood just to tell a great story with brilliant male characters and brilliant female characters and bugger intersectional politics. Yet at the same time, it is telling stories about people who are on the wrong side of the tracks and who are in minorities, as well as people who have got money and people who have got privilege. But they all have their crosses to bear. And there are all these stories of them overcoming challenges, big and small, all the way through. The way the characters work with and against each other across all the seasons is really enjoyable. And bugger me, Dave, they stuck the landing. By the end, the series really does earn the name Cobra Kai. And I thought, oh my God, that was so well done. I could go back to the start and do it all over again. It was great.
That's very cool.
Yeah, fantastic.
As I mentioned in the last month, I have been starting on the Babylon 5 Blu-ray. I've now watched all of season 1. I enjoyed that. I'm glad I did it. There are some episodes in there like TKO that I watched once when I bought the VHSs back in the 90s and haven't watched again since. And some that I've only watched maybe once since. There are definitely some episodes in season 1 that don't hold up and that I think is just sort of very generic Star Trek-esque science fiction, but where you can start to see the show growing up and being something unique is really wonderful. And then when it really starts to hit with stuff like Babylon Squared and Chrysalis, and even stuff like Quality of Mercy, which is not a big sort of bash over the head episode, but is just a really well written one. I love Parliament of Dreams. The only thing that I found was I just felt very wistful for never being able to quite capture what it was like to see some of those episodes for the first time. I did sort of think that, and you know, every TV show, you're never going to be able to quite get that. But with Babylon 5, I just have such powerful memories of genuinely being excited about, oh my God, what's happening? What are they rolling out? And sort of sad that I'm never going to be able to capture that. Again, I've now watched the first season of The Young Pope with Jude Law, which I really enjoyed. I have started watching Invisible Boys, which is an Australian TV show. I was going to say it's sort of, you know, the Australian Young Royals or Heartstopper, but being Australian, they've set it in Geraldton, which, for those who don't know, take the city of Perth, which is literally the most remote capital city on the planet, and go about 1,000 kilometres into the desert up the coast from there, and you've got Geraldton. So it's a story about sort of a couple of young gay boys sort of, you know, coming to terms with their sexuality and coming out in that environment, which is bleak and depressing. It's not Heartstopper, let me put it that way. So I'll have more of a comments on that when I finish it next month. I have watched a few random episodes of classic Trek. I did start with Let This Be Your Last Battlefield, which proved to me, and for those who don't know, that's the one with the aliens who are half black, half white, on different sides of their body. It proved to me that, yes, Star Trek did do politics back in the day, and yes, there were episodes that were very, very unsubtle and ruined because it did the politics in that way back in the day. It's not good. Really enjoyed the Enterprise incident. And then a bunch of stories I haven't watched since the 90s when Channel 7, I think it was, repeated all of classic Trek here in the late 90s. Paradise Syndrome was fine but dull, and The Children Shall Lead was not as bad as I thought it was going to be, but was pretty bad. Spectre of the Gun I quite enjoyed. Day of the Dove I enjoyed a lot more than I did as a kid. So that was all very fun, and not something I watched, but something I saw was our boy Samuel Barnett, Rob.
Yay!
Out in Australia. I believe he's in Sydney at the moment, Rob. I didn't realise this.
He came to the Opera House.
Oh, there you go. But I randomly saw him on stage at a festival and thought, Samuel Barnett's in Australia. What's he doing? He must be out for something. Turns out he was doing a play. I roped a couple of friends along and we went and saw the play, feeling afraid as if something terrible is going to happen. I thought it was very funny, incredibly dark, a bit shocking and uncomfortable in places, but his performance is stunning, wonderful. I'm really glad I saw it live. I'm really glad I saw him performing on stage in this one-man show. Friend of the podcast, Simon Moore, has seen it in Sydney. He didn't think it was all that shocking, and he says maybe that says something about our different lives. I point out, well, you do live in Sydney, so we're a bit more tamer down here in Melbourne. So so look, that was great to see Samuel Barnett.
Yeah, that's fantastic. He is the man who should have been Doctor Who and could still be Doctor Who. Damn it.
Look, I said that we've started planning our 16 for 16, and I think we know what one of them's going to be, don't we, Rob?
He's on the list.
He's on the list.
Fantastic. Now, Dave, next time we thought we were about due to dive into a Doctor Who novel again, and this time around I think this will excite people because we're often asked about EDAs. So we've decided we're going to be looking at the Lance Parkin novel Father Time, featuring the 8th Doctor and his daughter Miranda. And if the mention of a Doctor's daughter long before the Tennant story of that name gets you excited, dear listener, do stay tuned. You've got a copy, Dave. I've got a copy, and damn it, we're going to read it next month.
Yes, absolutely. We apologise, listeners, we're not putting up a poll to choose which book we're going to read on this occasion. That's because I only own about 9 of the EDAs. And so I said to Rob, well, these are the choices. And you said, well, I'm going to read that one. And I thought, yeah, Lance Parkin, I'm up for that. So unfortunately, there wasn't a sort of a wide range for us to pick from. We were limited by what we physically have to read. So we're going with Father Time, and I have not read it before, so I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, okay. Well, look, it's reasonably standalone. That's one of the reasons I picked it. It's Lance Parkin, who is very good, and it's an interesting story. So I'm hoping you like it. Yeah,
well, look, the only reason I own it is that the podcast Rural Stories in the End did it about 6 months ago, and it was one of the ones where I thought, that sounds really good. I should read it sometime, and was able to get a reasonably priced copy on eBay. And so I did buy it with the purpose of reading it eventually, and so now I am. So
here we go.
The universe has aligned on this one, Rob.
Very nice. But until next time, I've been Rob.
And I've been David.
Oh, David. Gosh, very formal. I've been Robert as well, and we will see you next time on The Doctor Who Show.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. You've been listening to
The Doctor Who Show with Rob and Dave.
Find us online by searching for
The Doctor Who Show.
We also love it when you write in. Drop us a line anytime at hello@thedwshow.net.